Then her voice broke out, hoarse, but steady enough to tear through the dawn. "I am not clean anymore." The words landed heavy as stone. She clutched the sheet tighter, as if waiting for him to slam the door in her face. The desert night hadn't quite released its hold when the first sound came. Not coyotes, not wind through the mesquite. This was something weaker, softer. A dull thud against old pine. Then another. Jonas Macready stirred awake in his chair on the porch. He hadn't slept in a real bed in years, not since the war took his wife and the fever took his boy. Nights on the porch, with the sky wide open and a bottle near, were enough. But this sound wasn't the bottle rolling. It was at his door. His fingers brushed against the scattergun prop beside him, instinct more than thought. He rose, boots dragging across the porch boards. Another sound, like knuckles trying, failing, then just leaning into the wood for support. Jonas pulled the latch slow, muzzle angled just right. The door swung back and the barrel lowered on its own. A girl, barefoot, her hair tangled into ropes, face cut and swollen on one side. She was wrapped in nothing but a filthy bedsheet, clutched tight at her collarbones. Her lips trembled, but her eyes, those eyes weren't just scared. They were hollowed out, like someone had scooped out every bit of youth and left behind something older than her years. Jonas didn't speak. Neither did she. For a breath, it was just dust hanging between them. Then her voice cracked, ragged, but steady enough to cut through the dawn. "I'm not clean." The words seemed to weigh more than her body. She clutched the sheet tighter, as if expecting him to slam the door in her face. Jonas didn't. His hand went to his coat, hanging on the peg. He pulled it down, heavy and worn, and held it out. She stared, unmoving, as if the gesture were foreign. Finally, slow as an animal coaxed from hiding, she reached, pulled it around her shoulders, and disappeared inside its folds. Jonas stepped aside, tilting his head toward the tack room behind the kitchen. She passed by him, walking with a limp, the sheet dragging dust, and he caught a glimpse of bruises, some fresh, others weeks old. He shut the door behind her without a word. Inside, the stove hadn't been lit since yesterday. Jonas struck a match, let the fire catch, and set a kettle on. The girl, no, not a girl, not anymore, sank down onto a stool, breathing in short gasps. She never asked for water, but Jonas poured some anyway, sliding the tin cup across the table. She gripped it with shaking fingers, sipped once, then set it down, as if her throat couldn't decide whether to accept kindness. Jonas leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He wasn't about to ask questions. He'd learned long ago that folks will tell you when they're ready, or never. But still, her words echoed. "I'm not clean." That morning, the desert sun lifted itself slow, casting long shadows over the ranch. Jonas walked out to feed the chickens, though his ears stayed tuned to the tack room door. Something about her, the way she'd stood, the way her voice hadn't broken when she said it, told him this wasn't just a runaway. This was a mess, stitched together by power, money, and cruelty. And now it had landed on his porch. By mid-morning, Jonas had settled into his chair again, boots propped against the porch rail. The scattergun leaned within reach. He rolled a cigarette, lit it, and exhaled into the dry air. The quiet didn't last. The dogs barked low, not frantic, but steady, a warning. Jonas squinted down the trail. Dust was rising, a single rider coming hard. Whoever it was, they rode with purpose. Jonas rose, leaning the scattergun against the wall. He didn't move to greet the rider, just waited. The man pulled up sharp, horse-lathered, eyes sharp as glass. Broad shoulders, scar down his cheek, pistol worn shiny at his hip. He looked Jonas over like a man weighing the price of beef. "Seen a girl?" His voice was flat, official almost. Blonde, barefoot. Might have been wrapped in a sheet. Jonas chewed the end of his cigarette, squinting like the sun was too bright. "You lose your damn mind already today." The man didn't smile. "She belongs to Mr. Grayley. Ran off this morning. Papers signed and sealed. She's his wife now. I'm just here to bring her home." The kettle whistled faintly inside. Jonas didn't turn. He walked over to the well, drew up a bucket, and let the water splash heavy back down. "You see a girl run through cactus barefoot in nothing but a sheet. You don't bring her home. You bring her help. That girl's got bruises on bruises. And the man she ran from ought to be ashamed to call himself anything but a coward." The rider's eyes narrowed, his horse pawing at the dirt. "You sure you want to be the one standing between Mr. Grayley and his wife?" Jonas met his stare, voice low but iron. "I'm sure I ain't moving." The silence stretched, not peaceful silence, the kind that makes the air heavy, like the world is holding its breath. Then the rider did something Jonas didn't expect. He smiled. Not a warm smile, but one that promised the next time he came, he wouldn't be alone. He tipped his hat mockingly, turned his horse, and rode back down the trail. Jonas watched until the dust settled. He let out a slow breath, turned back toward the house, and stepped inside. The girl hadn't moved from the stool, but her eyes were on him now, not wide with fear anymore, studying him, measuring, as if trying to figure out just what kind of man she'd stumbled into. Jonas set a hunk of bread on the table. She didn't touch it, not yet. He walked back out onto the porch and lifted the old rifle down from the hooks above the door. His fingers brushed the stock, worn smooth from another lifetime, because men like Grayley never sent just one dog, and next time they wouldn't knock. The desert wore silence like a cloak that day, a silence broken only by the low hum of cicadas and the faint creak of Jonas's porch chair, but beneath it there was tension, something in the air that told a man trouble hadn't left, only stepped aside for a spell. Inside the tack room, the girl slept, or at least her body rested on the cot Jonas had set up. Sleep didn't come easy to eyes like hers. He could tell by the way she stirred, fingers twitching, lips whispering words that never reached sound. Whatever demons rode her dreams, they rode her hard. Jonas busied himself with chores. He patched fence rails, fed the chickens, and checked the water troughs. But his eyes kept drifting back to the ranch house, to the closed door of that tack room. It had been years since another soul had shared his land. He'd built his life on silence and solitude, but now silence wasn't the same. It pressed heavier, as though every sound from inside that room was asking him a question he wasn't ready to answer. By noon, the girl stepped out. She wore his coat still, sleeves dangling over her hands. Bare feet pressed against hot dirt, she walked like each step was borrowed. Jonas didn't look up from the gate he was fixing, but he saw her in the corner of his eye. She stopped a few feet away. "Can I help?" Her voice carried a trace of something new, uncertainty, but also the smallest flicker of wanting to belong. Jonas didn't answer right away. He tested the hinge with his hand, then held out a small hammer. "You know how to swing one of these?" She shook her head, strands of hair falling into her face. "Well," Jonas said, "you're about to learn." He guided her hand around the handle, showed her the angle, the pressure. She missed the nail the first few tries, tapping wood instead of iron. But he didn't correct with words, only let her try again until the rhythm caught. By the time the hinge sat flush, she was breathing heavy, but her lips carried a shadow of something like pride. It wasn't much. A squeaky gate. A girl with bruised arms, holding a hammer. But to Jonas, it meant more than 100 cattle bought or sold. It meant she was doing something that wasn't running, hiding, or breaking. Later that afternoon, they sat on the porch. He in his chair, she on the step, watching the dust roll across the flats. Chickens scratched at the earth nearby, unconcerned with the storm of men and cruelty brewing just beyond sight. Her voice came quiet but steady. "You think he'll come back?" Jonas didn't look at her, just kept his gaze on the horizon. "I'd bet my last boot on it." She nodded once, like she already knew. But Jonas noticed. Her hands had stopped trembling. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in bands of red and violet, Jonas finally asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated, as though saying it might bind her to something she wasn't sure of. "Evelyn." Jonas rolled the name over in his mind, then gave a slow nod. "Evelyn. You can stay as long as you need." Her lips parted, maybe to say thank you, maybe to argue, but no words came. She just pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. Night fell heavy. Jonas kept the rifle close, leaning against the wall by his bedroll. The desert outside carried a quiet too sharp, like it was waiting for hooves to break it. He lay awake longer than usual, listening, and just before dawn, it came. Dogs barking. Low, sharp, urgent. Jonas was on his feet in a breath, rifle in hand, boots thudding against the porch boards. Out across the flats, 3 trails of dust rose, growing larger with each hoofbeat. 3 riders. Jonas stepped off the porch, steady and slow. The barrel of his rifle glinted in the first light of morning. Evelyn, half hidden behind the curtain of the tack room window, watched with wide eyes. The riders came fast. Horses lathered until they drew up short before the ranch. Front and center was Grayley himself. He looked too polished for the dirt he carried in his soul. Hat crisp, gloves neat, coat fitted. A man dressed like a gentleman, but stinking of whiskey and arrogance. Flanking him were 2 bruisers, broad and mean, their faces carved from fights and bad whiskey. Both had guns at their sides, worn from use. Grayley dismounted slow, taking his time like the land already belonged to him. He tugged at his gloves, voice smooth but sharp enough to cut. "Heard you been hiding my wife, McCready." Jonas didn't blink. His voice came back like gravel dragged across stone. "Heard you been beating what ain't yours to touch." Grayley's smile dropped, eyes hardening. "That girl belongs to me. Papers signed. Law on my side." Jonas stepped forward, boots crunching against dirt. Calm as morning, his rifle steady. Law don't mean squat when a man's got no soul. One of the goons moved first. They always did. He lunged from the left, fast but dumb, fist raised. Jonas pivoted, cracked him across the jaw with the rifle stock. The man hit the ground with a grunt, spitting dust. The other drew iron. Jonas was quicker. One shot rang out, sharp and final. The second man staggered, clutched his chest, and dropped heavy into the dirt. The world fell silent, save for the echo of the shot rolling off into the desert hills. Greeley froze, still holding those gloves like they meant something. His face had gone pale beneath the brim of his hat. Jonas walked closer, slow, deliberate, until he stood close enough that his words struck like a blade. "You listen good. If I see your boots on this dirt again, I won't be aiming to scare. I'll be digging your grave right where you stand." Graylee's mouth opened, but no words came. He stepped back, then another, until he was at his horse. Like a boy caught stealing, he mounted quick and rode hard, leaving dust in his wake. Jonas stood still, rifle in hand, until the last of them disappeared into the horizon. When he turned back, Evelyn stood in the doorway, no curtain to hide behind. Her eyes weren't wide with fear now. They were fixed on him, steady, like she was seeing a man who didn't just fight, but fought for her. And for the first time in what might have been years, Jonas felt something shift inside his chest. Not triumph, not pride, just the faintest spark of something he thought long gone, something like hope. The morning after Graylee rode off, the ranch was quiet again, too quiet. Jonas knew better than to trust that kind of silence. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the lull before men gathered more horses, more guns, more reason to come back, louder than before. Still, life on a ranch didn't wait for threats. Fences sagged, animals wandered, gates needed mending. Jonas moved through the chores with practiced rhythm, though his hand never strayed far from the rifle. Evelyn followed at a distance, watching, almost like she was trying to memorize the way he lived. Around midday, Jonas sat sharpening a hatchet under the shade. Evelyn approached, hesitant, holding a tin cup of water. Her eyes had less of the wild look now, but still carried shadows deep enough to swallow a man whole. "You never asked," she said quietly. Jonas didn't look up. "About what?" "About why I ran." The rasp of the whetstone slowed. He set the blade down, gave her a long, steady glance. "Didn't need to. I saw enough." Her fingers tightened around the cup. She sat down across from him, shoulders stiff. Graylee. My father owed him. Cards, dice, whiskey, whatever he could lose, he did. Until the only thing left was me. He signed papers, like I was a cow changing hands. Said it was better than getting shot over debt." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "Graylee didn't wait for a wedding night. He took what he thought he bought. And when I told my father, he said I should be grateful I wasn't left in a ditch." Jonas's jaw tightened. He'd seen men trade bullets over spilled beer. But to trade flesh and blood, your own child, for a debt. That was a rot deeper than anything the desert sun could burn clean. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I don't know why I came here. I didn't even know this place was yours. I just kept running until I couldn't anymore." Jonas leaned back, rubbing the stubble on his chin. "You ain't got to explain. A man like Graylee, he don't know how to build, only how to take. World's full of men like that. But it don't mean you gotta carry his filth with you." She looked down at her hands. "But I do carry it, every step, every breath. That's why I told you I'm not clean." Jonas stared at her, voice steady but softer now. "Evelyn, I've been through war. I seen rivers turn red and men broken past fixing. But I'll tell you this plain. What was done to you don't make you unclean. It makes him unfit to be called a man." For the first time, she met his gaze without flinching. Something shifted there, small but real. A spark trying to push through ash. The rest of the day passed in long silences, broken only by the scrape of tools, the cluck of chickens, and the far-off call of coyotes. By sundown, they sat on the porch again, the desert glowing gold. Evelyn pulled the coat tight around her, though the air was warm. "You ever had family?" she asked. Jonas's eyes fixed on the horizon. "Had a wife. Fever took her. Had a boy. Fever took him too. After that, all I had was this dirt and the quiet." Evelyn's face softened. "And yet, you let me stay." Jonas gave a slow nod. Sometimes the quiet gets too loud. Night crept in. Jonas lit a lantern, set it on the porch rail. The glow spilled across the yard, casting long shadows. Evelyn lingered on the step, her voice barely above the chirp of crickets. "If he comes back." "When?" Jonas corrected. She swallowed. "When he comes back, he'll bring more men, more guns, maybe the law." Jonas checked the rifle, the way a man checks his heartbeat. "Then we'll meet 'em same as the last. Steel for steel, truth for lies." Evelyn shook her head. "Why? Why risk it for me? You don't even know me." Jonas's gaze was steady, worn from years of dust and loss. "I don't need to know you to know what's right." The lantern flame flickered. Evelyn lowered her eyes, and for once, she didn't argue. Just before dawn, Jonas woke to the dogs again. Not barking this time, growling, low and sharp. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Across the ridge, faint lights moved, lanterns swaying, horses shifting. More than a few. Jonas's gut told him this wasn't just Grelly and two goons. This was a party. He walked back inside, found Evelyn awake already, sitting upright, eyes wide. "They're coming, aren't they?" Jonas nodded. "Reckon so." Her lips pressed tight, hands gripping the edge of the cot. "Then maybe I should go. If I leave, they won't—" "They'll hunt you down, Evelyn," Jonas cut in, voice iron. "And if they don't find you, they'll tear this land apart just to prove they can. Running ain't the answer." She looked at him, desperation and defiance warring in her eyes. "Then what is?" Jonas lifted the rifle, set it across his lap. Standing. Evelyn stared, chest rising and falling. Slowly, she nodded, as if accepting that her fight was no longer hers alone. The first rays of dawn cut across the horizon, and with them came the faint thunder of hooves. Jonas sat on the porch, rifle steady, boots planted firm. Evelyn stood just behind the doorframe, clutching the coat tighter, but her eyes, though still shadowed, held something new, not just fear, resolve. The morning broke with no birdsong. The land seemed to hold its breath. Out across the flats, the haze of dust swirled like a storm waiting to fall. Jonas sat on the porch, rifle resting across his knees, boots planted solid. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the faint shadows moving in the distance. Evelyn lingered behind the doorway, the lantern light of night now replaced by cold dawn. She clutched the coat he'd given her, knuckles white, but her gaze no longer wandered. She stood still, waiting, bracing. The dogs bristled, hackles up. A low growl rolled from their throats. Jonas gave one slow nod, almost like he was agreeing with them. "They're close." Hooves thundered at last, carrying with them the weight of arrogance and violence. 5 riders this time. Grelly led the pack, still too polished for the dirt under his boots, but his eyes told a different story. Bloodshot, cornered, desperate. He hadn't come just to collect. He'd come to prove himself. Jonas rose as they pulled up, dust swirling around the horses. The rancher stood tall, rifle loose in his grip, as if daring the earth itself to move against him. Grelly swung down from his horse with a flourish, pulling off his gloves like he was stepping into church. His voice carried sharp across the yard. "You've made a fool of me, Macready, hiding what's mine, laying hands on my men. You think you can shame me in front of this territory?" Jonas's voice was low, steady, like thunder rumbling over far-off hills. "You did that yourself, the moment you put papers to a woman like she was cattle. The moment you raised a hand instead of a heart." Grelly's face twisted, rage burning through his mask of civility. He gestured, and two of his men dismounted, moving toward the porch, guns at their sides, hands twitching. Jonas lifted his rifle, cocked it with a slow, deliberate motion. "Careful now. You step on this dirt, you best be ready to stay in it." The standoff stretched, the kind that seemed to bend time. The only sound was the restless shifting of hooves, the rattle of leather straps, and the sharp inhale of a world about to break. Then, like lightning splitting the sky, it did. One of Grayle's men drew. Jonas fired. The shot rang like a hammer to an anvil, echoing across the valley. The man spun backward, dust swallowing him. The second rushed forward, reckless. Jonas swung the stock of his rifle, catching him square across the temple. He crumpled, blood mixing with the earth. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked. The dogs leapt, snapping at heels, buying Jonas precious seconds. Evelyn ducked behind the doorframe, heart pounding. But her eyes never left the man who stood between her and the world that wanted her broken. Jonas moved with the steadiness of a man who'd fought wars before and lost everything but the will to fight. He reloaded smooth, quick, dropped another rider from his saddle with a shot clean to the shoulder. The horse bolted, dragging the man screaming through the dust. But there were too many. One rider circled wide, pistol raised, angling for the porch. Jonas fired, but the hammer clicked. Empty. He swung the rifle like an axe, smashing it across the man's chest before he could fire. The yard filled with smoke, dust, the stench of sweat and gunpowder. Evelyn clutched the frame, trembling but unmoving. Something inside her whispered to run, but stronger still was the sight of Jonas, battered yet unyielding, holding the line like the earth itself depended on it. At last the dust settled enough to show the ground littered with bodies, some groaning, some still. Only Grayle remained upright, chest heaving, face pale but defiant. Jonas stepped forward, blood seeping from a graze at his arm, eyes locked on the man who had brought hell to his doorstep. Grayle spat into the dirt. "You think this ends here? You think one old man and his broken gun can stop the law? She's mine, Macready. Signed, sealed. She carries my mark now, whether you like it or not." Jonas stood close enough to see the sweat on Grayle's brow, his voice gravel and fire. "A man doesn't own a woman. He doesn't own her skin, her soul, or her scars. And the law you hide behind ain't worth the paper it's written on." For a long, sharp moment it seemed Grayle might draw again. His fingers twitched near his holster, his eyes wild. Jonas didn't move. His hand rested steady on the barrel, ready but patient. Then Grayle faltered. Maybe it was the bodies of his men cooling in the dirt. Maybe it was the cold fire in Jonas's eyes. Whatever it was, his hand dropped away. "Next time," he hissed. Jonas leaned in, words like stone. "There won't be a next time." The silence that followed was louder than gunfire. Finally, Grayle mounted his horse, his pride bleeding heavier than his men. He pulled hard on the reins, turning his horse away from the ranch, his shoulders rigid with hatred. His retreating figure looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the dust and the endless desert. Jonas lowered the rifle at last. His chest rose and fell, each breath like thunder. He turned toward the porch. Evelyn stood there, face streaked with dust, but her eyes shone with something new. Not relief, not even safety, but recognition that for once someone had chosen to stand when every other man had walked away. She stepped forward, slow, bare feet against the earth. Her voice was soft, fragile, but steady. "Why do you keep fighting for me? Jonas wiped the sweat from his brow, gaze fixed on her. Because someone should have, a long time ago. The desert wind carried their silence after that, sweeping across the bodies, the blood, the dust. And though Jonas knew Grayley wasn't gone for good, in that moment, standing there with Evelyn's eyes locked on his, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not peace, but purpose. For 3 days, the ranch was quiet again. No riders, no dust clouds on the horizon, just the wind sighing through mesquite branches, the cluck of hens, the rhythm of a man and a woman moving about the same piece of dirt, not quite together but no longer apart. Jonas kept himself busy with chores, but he carried a limp now, where a bullet had grazed him deep. He never mentioned it, never slowed down. But Evelyn noticed. She'd leave water where he worked, patch the tear in his shirt sleeve, sweep the porch without being asked. Small things, but they filled the silence with something softer than fear. One morning, she joined him at the fence line. He handed her a coil of wire without a word, and she held it steady as he set the posts. The sun was sharp overhead, sweat streaking both their brows. When they paused, Evelyn glanced sideways. "Why don't you leave?" she asked. "Sell this land. Go somewhere Grayley can't find you." Jonas tightened the wire, jaw flexing. Because running don't change a man's shadow. You can cross mountains, rivers, deserts. It'll still be there, trailing you. Only way to beat it is to turn and face it. Her lips pressed tight, and she nodded, as if filing those words somewhere inside herself. That evening, they sat on the porch again. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the land in fire and gold. Evelyn spoke after a long silence. "There's something I need to tell you." Jonas didn't turn, just kept his eyes on the dying light. "Go on." She gripped the coat tighter around her frame. "When I ran, I wasn't just running from Grayley. I was running because of what he left inside me." Her hand went to her stomach, light but trembling. Jonas closed his eyes. He didn't need her to say more. He'd seen the look before, the fear that life itself might carry a man's violence forward. "I didn't ask for this," Evelyn whispered, "and I don't know if I can carry it. How do you love a child that comes from hate?" Jonas's voice came rough, but steady. "By remembering it, ain't the child's fault. By remembering you're the one who'll raise it, not him. That baby don't carry his sin, only yours, what you choose to give." Her eyes filled, not with shame this time, but with something rawer, sharper. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against her knees. Her shoulders shook, but no sobs came, just the silent breaking of a wall too heavy to keep standing. Jonas set his rifle aside, leaned forward, and placed a hand gently on her back. For years, he'd touched nothing but wood, rope, steel. Touching her now felt like handling something fragile, something worth keeping. The days passed. Evelyn grew steadier, her steps surer. She fed the hens, swept the rooms, even tried her hand at cooking, though she burned the beans twice. Jonas never complained. He ate what she made, grunted his approval, and kept going. Word in town spread fast. Folks whispered when Jonas walked into the mercantile with Evelyn at his side, when he bought flour and thread, when he asked for baby blankets. Grayley's name lingered on their tongues like smoke, but no one said it loud. Some looked at Evelyn with pity, others with scorn. But Jonas didn't care. He stood tall beside her, silent but firm, daring anyone to question what they saw. A month passed. No riders came. No shadows darkened the trail. Maybe Grelly had licked his wounds and moved on. Maybe he waited, biding time. Jonas didn't waste thought on which. He just lived each day as it came. One evening, Evelyn stood on the porch, hand resting lightly on her stomach. The desert wind tangled her hair, and her eyes traced the horizon where the sun dipped low. Jonas joined her, setting his coffee mug on the rail. "You ever think it's possible," she asked softly, "to start again? After everything?" Jonas took a long sip, then nodded slow. "Every day you wake up's a start. Question is what you do with it." She turned to him, searching his weathered face for something. Permission, maybe, or proof. He met her gaze, steady and sure, and for the first time she smiled. Not wide, not long, but real. Months later, the child came. Born on a cold desert night, with only Jonas's calloused hands and Evelyn's grit to see it through. The baby's cries filled the ranch, sharp and new, cutting through years of silence like a bell tolling hope. Jonas wrapped the child in a blanket and placed it in Evelyn's arms. She stared down, tears tracing her cheeks. But this time, they weren't heavy with shame. They were light, breaking something open inside her. "He don't look like Grelly," she whispered. Jonas smiled faintly, lines deepening at his eyes. "He looks like himself. That's all that matters." From that night on, the ranch wasn't quiet in the same way. There were cries, laughter, footsteps small and unsteady. Evelyn moved with a strength Jonas hadn't seen before. And Jonas, for the first time in years, had a reason to rise each morning that wasn't just habit. Folks in town still whispered. They always would. But the whispers never reached farther than the dirt road leading to Jonas's gate. Out there, on that patch of land, whispers didn't matter. What mattered was the life that had been spared. The child who would never know the fists of Grelly, or the shame of his paper laws. And if Grelly still lived somewhere, licking his wounds, plotting revenge, well, Jonas still kept his rifle cleaned and ready. But he also kept something else ready. His heart. Hardened by war, softened again by a girl who whispered she wasn't clean, but who proved she was braver than any man who'd tried to break her. Jonas had fought many battles in his life, but this one, this choice to hold on instead of letting go, was the only one that ever felt like a true victory. Because being a man, he realized, wasn't just about the wars you fight or the blood you spill. It was about what you choose to keep safe, what you refuse to let the world throw away. And as the desert stars burned above that little ranch, Jonas sat on the porch with Evelyn beside him, their child cradled in her arms. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter than the dust, his heart stronger than the silence. The world would keep on turning, cruel as ever. But here, on this dirt, something had been set right. Out here in the desert, the law is written in dust, blood, and silence. But sometimes, a man chooses not just to fight with his gun, but with his heart. Jonas stood when no one else would, and in doing so, he gave Evelyn more than safety. He gave her back a future. Now, I'll ask you the same question Jonas faced. Could you protect what the world tried to throw away? Could you love what others call shame, and raise it as your own? That's the mark of true strength. And if this story struck a chord with you, don't let it end here. Hit that like, tap subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the strongest folks aren't the ones who take, they're the ones who hold on. Because out here in the Wild West, that's what makes a man worth remembering.